The most important thing in overtone singing is hearing. It turns out that not everyone hears the overtones spontaneously. This is work from the early 2000s, here in Heidelberg at the University Hospital, which showed that it depends on which part of the brain processes the sound. There is a listening center on the right that hears overtones, and there is a listening center on the left that is responsible for the mathematical part of the music, that is, intervals and melodies and rhythm and things like that, and on the right the timbre is analyzed, but that also contains the information of the overtones that are not normally heard separately. And then there's an interpretation of sound as speech, that takes place on the left side, in Broca's center and Wernicke's center. They're both on the left side, and now it's important that when you sing overtones, you perceive the overtones, that is the right side, activates the right auditory cortex.
Jetzt ist es wichtig, dass man beim Obertonsingen die Obertöne wahrnimmt. Das heißt also die rechte Seite, den rechten Hörkortex aktiviert.
For this, I have a test that you can use first to check where you stand, and at the end there is a systematic guide to perception on the right side. This means that when this video is over, you will hear completely different if you don't hear the overtones at the first example. I'm now singing a meaningless sequence of syllables, and I'm singing them on a single note, which means I'm not changing the pitch, but there is still a melody in these syllables. And I hide this melody in the resonances of the vowels. Let's see if you can hear it. This was a very well-known melody from the classical period. Little hint, it was composed in Bonn. I don't want to hide it, it's about learning to listen, it's not about showing what you can't do, but exactly the opposite. It was Freude schöne Güterfunken, in that pitch.
Scène de légumes de l'œuf halote schemme taffe, parme de légumes gel, parme de seffe lappe. Normally, only 5% of people hear this melody spontaneously. If you now know what to listen to, then it is possible that you already have a vague idea of the melody, or you can already hear it clearly. For those who don't hear the melody now, this has nothing to do with musicality, but only with the preference on which side your brain processes this sound. There is usually a block then, the left brain thinks it is speech but doesn't understand a word. Then it tells the rest of the brain that it needs all the attention and language is just very dominant in us. So in most people apparently this side then, the language center, is particularly active. But now I want to reverse this filter that distinguishes between important and unimportant, that is, thinks that speech is important and timbre and harmonics are unimportant. And I do that by systematically emitting now in the sound information for the left side, for the speech center. I do that step by step, so you can tell at which point that flips. At the end you'll definitely hear the melody. Scène de légumes, je seule bonne fête Köne de léger bonne tollevete könepe.
Now I used only eudiaresis sounds, and that means in the phonetic vowel triangle I went along only vowels where the second formant, as it used to be called, or I call it the second resonant frequency, changes, and I left out all the frequencies that go in the direction of A, that is, that changed the first resonance. Now there are usually about 20% of the people who perceive the melody now. For the rest, I go a step further and omit the consonants. Now usually about 40 to 60% of the people are there and hear this melody. If you haven't heard it yet, I'll go one step further. By now everyone should have heard the tune. Who now does not hear the melody, as a whistling melody, then I can unfortunately not help. But I have never experienced that someone has not heard the melody yet. It can only be that you hear it so that it does not belong to the voice. Most people hear it as a whistling melody, and then it gets separated in the brain. You then hear two separate melodies, or you hear a buzzing sound, and a whistling melody as well. And this whistling melody can no longer be assigned to the voice in some people. Others can sort this whistling tone into the voice again. That is different in perception. The main thing is that you can hear this melody now. If you hear them, the next step now is to go backwards. Keep your attention on this melody, and just imagine it if necessary. I am now adding back the information for the Broca center step by step, in somewhat smaller increments. Now the melody should still be there. Always keep your attention on the melody. At this point, the melody becomes blurred for most, so it now moves into the background, becomes a bit more nebulous and is no longer perceived so clearly, because sibilants are now added, i.e. this T that contains high-frequency components and that immediately triggers our speech center. Still, stick with it and just try to follow this tune. If it's gone now, go back to that example where the consonants weren't there yet, or where the consonant was the N. You can fine-tune this even more by replacing the T sound with its sound.
Den T-Laut durch ein D-Laut ersetze.
And you notice here, the more sibilants come in, the more this melody now moves into the background in perception, and the speech center pushes itself forward. But the melody is still there. And especially interesting is the transition where you're no longer sure, am I imagining this because I know what I'm supposed to hear, or is this actually heard? And that's a very interesting transition, because that's where the consciousness decides whether it trusts the right hemisphere of the brain. That's a matter of trust. You know that I make the melody, so you can trust me. If you don't trust me, then trust your perception. If you distrust that, yes, then you just don't know. But nevertheless the melody is there. I know that I sing it. Next step. Now I've put a little bit of movement back into the first resonance, and now I'm putting in some bigger movements, and then I'm back where I started.
Und jetzt nehme ich etwas größere Bewegung rein und dann bin ich wieder am Anfang, mit dem ich begonnen hatte. Ne dalle fecune labe de safenade, tame du legame je se tale de femme pale.
And I hope that by now most of you have heard that. But if you've lost that 2 or 3 examples earlier, then it's still perfect, then the right side is now activated, and that creates an essential basis for learning overtone singing.
Wesentliche Grundlage geschaffen, das Overtone singen zu lernen.